Somewhere in Tennessee, in 1944, there was a hole in the map. Not blank, worse than blank. If you asked the government what was there, they'd tell you nothing existed at those coordinates at all. But 75,000 people were living inside that nothing, building something so secret that most of them didn't know what their own hands were making. A scientist could spend 2 years turning a single dial, recording a single number without ever learning what that number meant. And when the truth finally broke, on a single morning, in newspapers across the entire country, it didn't just reveal a city, it revealed that the people who built the most destructive weapon in human history were the last ones on Earth to find out what they'd done.
Here's the part almost no one knows. Some residents were secretly required to inform on their own neighbors. Workers were handed blank index cards and told that if they overheard anyone discussing the project, they had to write down what was said, who said it, and where. Then mail it to an address called the Acme Finance Company. If they heard nothing, they still had to mail a blank card every week. Years after the war, at a reunion for people who'd lived there in 1943, someone finally asked out loud if anyone else had been given that same assignment. About half the room raised their hands. They'd all been secretly watching each other the entire time, and none of them had known it. And even that wasn't enough, because a Soviet spy was inside Oak Ridge too, an army sergeant with a legitimate clearance, quietly passing information out of the one place in America supposedly sealed tighter than anywhere else. To understand how tens of thousands of adults could keep a secret that size from each other for years, you have to go back further, to a stretch of Tennessee farmland that one morning in late 1942 simply stopped existing. Families who had lived there for generations received notice that their land was being seized for the war effort. No further explanation. Some were given weeks to leave, others days. Church cemeteries were relocated. Cornfields were bulldozed within days of the last families packing their trucks. And in their place, almost overnight, a city began rising that would never appear on any published map of the United States.
It had no name the public was allowed to use. Internally, it was the Clinton Engineer Works. To the tens of thousands who would eventually live and work there, it was simply the reservation, or Oak Ridge. Here is the next real mystery. Within 2 years, this invisible city held a population larger than most state capitals in the region, and yet almost none of its residents could tell you precisely what it produced. How do you get 75,000 people to build something enormous together without letting most of them know what it is?
The answer was a system, not an accident. Every task inside Oak Ridge's plants was compartmentalized down to the smallest possible unit. A worker might spend a 12-hour shift turning a single dial, watching a single needle, recording a single number, with no instruction on what that number fed into. Security posters were bolted to walls across the site. What you see here, what you do here, what you hear here, when you leave here, let it stay here. Outgoing mail was read and censored line by line. This is the same system that quietly turned neighbor against neighbor with those index cards, and it still couldn't stop a real spy from operating inside the fences.
And the people running those dials were disproportionately young women, recruited straight out of high schools across the rural South and Midwest, given only days of training, and put to work operating something called a calitron, a machine the size of a small building, designed to separate uranium isotopes atom by atom. What almost none of them were told is that they consistently outperformed the trained physicists who built the machines in the first place, because the physicists overthought the dials, and the young women simply followed the procedure exactly as written. The people with the least information were, in a very real sense, running the most important machines on Earth better than the people who understood them. Outside the guarded perimeter, Oak Ridge behaved like any American boomtown. Movie theaters, bowling alleys, a company newspaper that reported on softball scores and church socials, but never, not once, on the one subject its readers were most curious about. Behind the fences, the numbers were almost impossible to believe. At its peak, Oak Ridge alone was consuming roughly 1/7 of all the electricity generated in the entire United States.
States, using about 20% more power than the city of New York just to run machines most of its own workers couldn't identify.
But scale wasn't the only cost hidden behind the wire. Thousands of the site's lowest-paid laborers were black workers, recruited from across the rural South and funneled into segregated, substandard housing, denied the skilled positions and often the basic amenities given freely to white employees doing comparable work. They built roads, guarded gates, and ran essential operations inside a facility that would not let them live with dignity, even while trusting them with a piece of the world's most guarded secret. Their names rarely made it into the official histories written after the war. Their labor is written into the walls of the plants, regardless. Above them, inside the project's inner circle, a different kind of tension was building. Not physical, but moral. Dozens of the scientists who had worked on the weapon, many at the project's Chicago laboratory, drafted a petition in the final weeks before it was used, urging President Truman to demonstrate the bomb's power rather than drop it directly on a city. It never reached him. General Leslie Groves, the project's military director, made sure of that. In July 1945, in the New Mexico desert, the material refined inside Oak Ridge's hidden plants was detonated for the first time. Witnesses described light brighter than the sun, and a silence afterward that several of them later said felt less like victory than dread. 3 weeks later, that material was inside a bomb over Hiroshima. Nagasaki followed days after. Within weeks, a war that had consumed the globe for 6 years ended, and only then did Oak Ridge's own workers learn what their careful, isolated tasks had actually assembled. Reporters were finally let past the checkpoints. The city's own newspaper printed its real purpose for the first time in its history. And across thousands of homes, husbands and wives sat down together and for the first time told each other the truth about where they'd spent the last 2 years. The petition that never reached Truman only became public 16 years later, once it was finally declassified. Long after the decision it tried to stop was already history. The reactions, once the truth landed, were never uniform. Some felt pride at having shortened a brutal war. Others felt something closer to horror. And a smaller number felt something stranger still, relief that the secret was finally out, mixed with a question that had no comfortable answer. What do you do with 2 years of your life you can never fully explain to anyone who wasn't there? Oak Ridge itself didn't vanish once the fences came down. It became a permanent center of American science, nuclear medicine, isotope research, some of the fastest supercomputers on Earth. But even that ordinary-sounding transformation hides something stranger. The Soviet Union tested its own atomic bomb just 4 years after Hiroshima, years ahead of what American intelligence had projected, in part because of spies who had already been inside facilities like Oak Ridge. The secret that took 3 years and total isolation to keep didn't even survive the decade. Which leaves the real question sitting underneath all of it, unresolved. Oak Ridge proved that tens of thousands of ordinary people could be trusted to build something world-altering without ever being told what it was for. It also proved that no system of fences, sensors, or neighbors secretly watching neighbors could actually hold the secret forever. So the question isn't whether something like Oak Ridge could happen again. It already has, several times, and the only thing that's changed is that we've stopped noticing the holes in the map.